A freight locomotive holds 5,000 gallons of diesel. It burns through 3 to 5 gallons every single mile. At that rate, a full tank is empty before the train even makes it to the other side of the country. And it almost never stops to get more. That sounds wrong. A machine that devours thousands of gallons of diesel should need fuel stops the way a truck does. More even. But it doesn't. Because a freight train doesn't avoid fuel stops. The fuel stops are hiding inside everything else the railroad already makes it do. So what exactly is the railroad making it do? The first thing you might picture is some kind of fuel depot alongside the tracks, a train version of a gas station. That doesn't exist. There are no trackside fuel pumps dotting the American rail network. No locomotive pulls up to a pump the way your car does. Instead, the fuel comes to the train. A tanker truck drives out to wherever the train happens to be sitting. A rail yard, a siding, a crew change point, backs up alongside the locomotive and pumps fuel directly into the tank. The industry has a name for this, DTL, direct-to-locomotive fueling. The truck meets the train, not the other way around. A single BNSF fueling facility moves 250,000 gallons of diesel in a single day. But DTL only explains how trains get fuel. It doesn't explain why they need it so infrequently. For that, you have to look at something most people completely misunderstand about what a freight locomotive actually is. A freight locomotive runs on diesel, but it is not a diesel vehicle. That is not a metaphor. The diesel engine inside a locomotive does not drive the wheels. There is no gearbox, no drive shaft, no mechanical connection between the engine and the track at all. What the diesel engine does is spin a generator. That generator converts mechanical energy into electricity, and that electricity flows through cables to electric motors mounted directly on the wheel axles. Railroaders call them traction motors. A freight train is an electric vehicle. It just happens to carry its own power plant. And that matters because the electric drivetrain wastes far less energy than a mechanical one. But the real advantage is not inside the locomotive. It is underneath it. Steel wheels, steel rail. Imagine pushing a hockey puck across a frozen lake. That effortless glide, where the puck just keeps going. That is steel on steel. Now imagine dragging that same puck across carpet. That resistance, that friction chewing at every inch of movement, that is rubber tires on asphalt. The rolling resistance of steel on rail is 15 to 30 times lower than rubber on road. And the result is an efficiency figure that almost sounds made up. 1 single gallon of diesel can move 1 ton of freight nearly 500 miles by rail. That same gallon moves the same ton roughly 130 miles by truck. And that 5,000-gallon fuel tank sitting under the locomotive, picture a tanker truck on the highway, the kind that delivers fuel to gas stations. The locomotive's tank holds roughly the same amount, except the tanker truck burns through its own fuel in a few hundred miles. The locomotive makes that same volume last for over 1,000. Trains don't just sip fuel, they barely know it's there. So the engine barely sips, and the tank is enormous. But a freight train crossing the United States still covers well over 1,000 miles. At 3 to 5 gallons per mile, that is thousands of gallons consumed. At some point, someone has to pump diesel into this thing. And someone does. But the train never stops because of it. Federal law already forces the train to stop, repeatedly, for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with fuel. First, the crew. The Hours of Service Act limits every train crew to 12 consecutive hours on duty. After 12 hours, they are done. If the clock runs out and no replacement crew is available, the train stops on the main line, right where it is, even if it blocks a road crossing. That means a crew change roughly every 250 to 350 miles. Second, the brakes. Federal regulation requires a Class 1A brake inspection every 1,000 miles. The train stops. Inspectors walk the entire length, sometimes over a mile of cars, testing air pressure and confirming every brake still functions. Neither of those stops exists because of fuel, but the railroad parks its fuel trucks at exactly those points. When the crew swaps, A tanker is already waiting. When the brakes get inspected, the locomotive gets topped off. Refueling doesn't create a stop, it borrows one. This system, where fuel is invisible, absorbed into stops the train is already making, is modern. And the best way to understand how radical it is to look at what came before it. In the earliest days of steam railroads, trains stopped for water every 7 to 10 miles. 7 miles. A distance you could walk in 2 hours. The boiler consumed water so fast that running dry didn't mean stalling. It meant the firebox plug melting or the boiler exploding. Even decades later, with tenders, dedicated cars carrying water and coal behind the locomotive, a steam engine in the 1930s still needed to stop every 100 to 150 miles. That meant the entire American rail network was physically built around fuel. Thousands of water towers stood along the tracks. Coal chutes sat at intervals across the continent. Entire small towns existed for no other purpose than to service passing trains. Railroaders had a word for them: jerkwater towns, places so small the crew had to jerk a water spout down to the tender by hand. When diesel-electric locomotives replaced steam in the 1940s and 50s, they did not just swap out the engine, they erased an entire infrastructure. The water towers came down, the coal chutes were demolished, the jerkwater towns withered. A machine that needed fuel every 100 miles was replaced by one that could cross 1,000 without thinking about it. The reason a freight train almost never stops to refuel is not one thing. It is a collision. Physics made the fuel last, steel on steel, nearly frictionless, turning every gallon into 500-ton miles of work that no other land vehicle can match. Engineering made the engine invisible. A diesel that never touches the wheels, feeding electricity to traction motors that lose almost nothing to heat or waste. Law created the openings. The Hours of Service Act forces a crew change before 12 hours. The Class 1A inspection forces a brake check before 1,000 miles. Both stops are mandatory. Both happen well inside the locomotive's fuel range, and logistics filled the gaps. An industry that learned to park tanker trucks at crew change points and inspection stops, so the diesel slips in during pauses the train was already taking. Nobody designed this. Nobody sat in a room and said, "Let's make refueling invisible." The physics made it possible. The regulations created the windows, and the railroads walked through them. Next time you are stopped at a railroad crossing, watching car after car roll past for 3, 4, 5 minutes, that locomotive has been running for 600 miles or more. Somewhere underneath it sits a tank half full of diesel. Somewhere ahead is a crew change point where a fuel truck is already waiting. The train will get there, the truck will pump, the tank will fill, and the train will keep moving, without adding a single minute to its schedule. The train didn't eliminate the fuel stop. The fuel stop was never really a stop at all.